Okay, so let us begin with where we have left in the previous part of reticular formation. So, in the previous part, we learned that reticular formation is connected to most of the cortical and subcortical structures and also to the spinal cord. Along with that, all the ascending sensory pathways gives a collateral to reticular formation before it terminates in the sensory cortex. So in this discussion, we are going to discuss about the fibers that come out of reticular formation. You can distinguish it into two types, descending and ascending, and we are going to see one by one. So descending fibers or descending projections and ascending projections, or otherwise called as ascending reticular activating system. Now descending fibers, basically they originate in the caudal part of the reticular formation or the brainstem, influence on the motor control and stretch reflex, does some sensory modulation and autonomic activity. Ascending fibers or ascending reticular activating system originates in the rostral part of the brainstem, controls the level of cortical activity in sleep wakefulness cycle. So coming to descending reticular system. So descending reticular system is of two subdivisions you can take. You can group the fibers into two subdivisions. The ones which comes out from the medulla called as medullary reticular projection, and the other group of fibers coming out of pons, pontine reticular projection. Now these two basically it excites, or in other ways it innervates the anti-gravity muscles. Okay, and one interesting feature is that both of them have opposite action and hence called as antagonistic function. Medullary reticular projection is inhibitory to the anti-gravity muscles and pontine reticular projection is facilitatory to anti-gravity muscles. Regarding pontine reticular system, this one is located slightly posteriorly and laterally in the pons in relation to the in the midline. Okay, so if you take the brain stem in relation to the midline, it is more posteriorly and laterally, and some fibers extend even up to mesencephalon. Okay, now what is the pathway like? So pontine reticular fibers, they pass through or transits through pontine reticulospinal tract, runs in the anterior column of the spinal cord and terminate on the anterior motor neurons exciting axial muscles of the body. Axial muscles of the body, mainly muscles of vertebral column and extensor muscles of the limb. Okay, so once again, pontine reticular fibers travel through pontine reticulospinal tract, runs in the anterior column of the spinal cord, terminate on the anterior motor neurons and excites the axial muscle of the body. So thereby it maintains the spinal cord reflexes and maintains posture against gravity. Pontine reticular formation has a high degree of natural excitability. That means whenever a movement is required to be done, pontine reticular system need to be activated in order to perform it smoothly by maintaining the posture against gravity. So it has got a natural excitability. Afferents that reaches these sets of fibers are mainly again from vestibular nuclei and deep nuclei of cerebellum. Okay, so from vestibular nuclei and deep nuclei of cerebellum. Now we know that vestibulospinal is excitatory to axial muscles or the anti-gravity muscles, and cerebellum also has got a role in the maintenance of posture. Now pontine reticular system, in other words it is called as pontine facilitatory or excitatory reticular system, functions in adjunction with vestibular nuclei and cerebellum to maintain the posture. Okay, so always this function as an adjunct. Okay, that is how it goes. Now, whenever, what is the mechanism by which this excitation occurs? This excitation of anti-gravity muscles occurs by increasing the gamma efferent discharge. So, students, now at this point of time, if you do not remember of gamma efferent and its importance, you must go back and read the innervation of muscle spindle in order to get it right what gamma efferents are doing. Okay, all right. So stimulation of this particular system, pontine reticular or excitatory system, leads to excitation of gamma efferent discharge, which increases the muscle tone and hence causes powerful excitation of anti-gravity muscles throughout the body. Now, medullary reticular system extends through the entire medulla. It lies more ventrally and medially near the midline. Now, this one transmits inhibitory signals through medullary reticulospinal tract, runs in the lateral column of the spinal cord, reaches the anterior motor neurons via interneuron and supply the anti-gravity muscles. Again, it causes relaxation of anti-gravity muscle by reducing the gamma efferent discharge and decreasing the muscle tone. So once again, medullary reticular system constitutes medullary inhibitory reticular fibers which transmits through medullary reticulospinal tract, runs in the lateral column of spinal cord, enters into the anterior motor neurons and innervates the anti-gravity muscles. It leads to inhibition or relaxation of anti-gravity muscles by way of reducing gamma efferent discharge and decreasing muscle tone. Now, what are the efferents that reaches medullary reticular system? The medullary inhibitory reticular area receives strong inputs from corticospinal tract, rubrospinal tract and other fibers from the basal ganglia. Now, these fibers, they activate the medullary reticular inhibitory system to counterbalance the excitatory signals from the pontine reticular system. Now, you would have understood why there should be an antagonistic function. It is mainly because if the medullary reticular system is not there in function, due to the powerful excitation caused by the pontine reticular system, the muscles may go into abnormally tense state. So it is always imperative that medullary reticular system gets activated in order to counterbalance the excitatory signals from the pontine reticular system. Now, there are also situations when higher centers of the brain can disinhibit the medullary system. Okay, so that is when you require to stand for a prolonged period of time. Now, you can see the cross section of the spinal cord which depicts the reticulospinal pathway and its two divisions. You can see, I told you, medullary runs more lateral column of spinal cord and pontine reticular spinal tract runs in the anterior column of spinal cord. So that the position is quite clear in this picture. Okay, all right. So thus we know that main function of this pontine facilitatory and medullary inhibitory reticular system is to control the posture and movement, also facilitate stereotyped movements like stepping and modulating muscle tone to either aid or inhibit the movement. So I hope it is clear so far. Now, let us come to the importance of higher centers or higher inputs on the reticular system. Okay, let us see. In order to understand that, a section has to be done at the mid-level of mesencephalon. Okay, that is exactly at the mid-collicular level, okay, between the two colliculi in the midbrain. So, if a section is done below this mid-level of mesencephalon, keeping the pontine and medullary reticular systems intact as well as the vestibular system intact, the animal develops a condition of, a condition called as decerebrate rigidity. Now, what happens here? why the decerebrate rigidity occurs. Decerebrate rigidity is nothing but it is a state when the extensor muscles go into the hyperactivity. Okay, so extensor muscle goes into hyperactivity, and this is how the person looks like, the posture looks like when the mid collicular decerebration is done. Okay. Now what happens here is there is interruption of all input coming from the cortex, that is your corticospinal and corticobulbar tracts, as well as your rubrospinal tract that comes from the red nucleus and basal ganglia. Also, the dominance of the ascending sensory pathways, which gives a collateral to the reticular excitatory area. Okay, so all these factors leads to hyperactivity in extensor muscles in all the four extremities. So why it happens? It is because of one, decreased input or almost interruption of input coming from the higher centers. Second, unopposed action of the pontine reticular area, which is excitatory to the extensor muscles. And three, dominance of ascending sensory pathways to the excitatory reticulospinal pathway, which can lead to hyperactivity in extensor muscles in all the four extremities. So this is how the picture, you can see it again, the neck, the trunk and the extensors of the legs, all these muscles will be abnormally tense or hyperactive. So I will now go on to ascending reticular activating system. Now, before going exactly into the ascending reticular activating system, I would like to bring here a fact that activation of brain can be done by two mechanisms or two ways. One, directly stimulating the background level activity of the neuronal level neuronal activity in the wide areas of brain, that is a direct stimulation of neurons in the cerebral cortex, or via neurohormonal system. So neurohormonal system, which can be facilitatory or inhibitory, that is mainly as a result of certain neurotransmitter substances in which acts on the selected areas of the brain. So two mechanisms or by two ways activation of brain occurs, one by direct activation and two by neurohormonal systems. Now coming back to ascending reticular activating system, this involves excitatory area located in the reticular substance. Now this excitatory area, you've been listening to this excitatory area for the past slides, in the past slides also. So excitatory area is nothing but mainly it is pontine and to some extent mesencephalan when it happens to the ascending projections also. Okay, so excitatory area is pons and fibers coming from pons and mesencephalan. Now this is also known as bulboreticular facilitatory area. So ascending reticular activating system extend upward into diencephalon and cerebrum via multiple diffuse pathways. So this entire system, which constitute fibers from pontile and mesencephalic portion of reticular formation, along with diencephalon and cerebrum with its multiple diffuse pathways, is called as reticular activating system, and it is also known as ascending arousal system. Now you can see here how the pathways are diffused into almost all the areas of the brain. Now, what are the main neurohormonal substances which are associated with activating system? Predominantly it is acetylcholine and norepinephrine. The acetylcholine or cholinergic neuron originates in the pedunculopontine nucleus and laterodorsal tegmental nucleus of the reticular formation. Noradrenergic neurons originate in the locus ceruleus. Okay. Now these fibers, they mainly, what do? They combine with other ascending pathways and ascend to the cerebral cortex, thalamus, and promote wakefulness and vigilance. So this is the importance of ARAS and the neurotransmitters involved with ARAS. Okay. Also, these substances or these neurotransmitters increases the responsiveness to sensory stimuli coming from the periphery, and that is why whenever you feel a particular sensation, you get into arousal, especially the pain sensation, you get into the arousal state. Okay, so now let us come to the pathway as such. The fibers originating or the ascending projections originating from the reticular formation, that is nothing but your bulbofacilitatory area, passes to thalamus and then to the cortex. Okay, now it passes through thalamus by two types of fibers: slow conducting fibers and fast conducting fibers. Slow conducting fibers, they come from large number of small neurons in the brainstem. Okay, large number of small neurons in the brainstem, reticular excitatory area, and it passes on to the thalamic nuclei, that is non-specific thalamic nuclei, which is mainly intralaminar and reticular nuclei. Now from there, these via small fibers, they are distributed throughout the cerebral cortex. You can see here from the bulboreticular excitatory area, fibers travel through the non-specific thalamic nuclei, and from there it enters into the cortex in a diffuse projection. Now, since these are slow conducting fibers, it's very easy to remember. Slow conducting fibers will last for many seconds to a minute or more, and it will help in controlling long-term background excitability level of the brain. Okay. Next comes your rapid transmitted fibers. These are from large neuronal cells and lie throughout the brainstem reticular area, that is your mainly the facilitatory area. Excite cerebrum for few milliseconds. Releases mainly acetylcholine. Now you know that these cholinergic neurons, it lasts for only few milliseconds, and hence why the excitation lasts only for less or short period of time. So we have once again two types of fibers: slow conducting fibers, which passes through the thalamic, non-specific thalamic nuclei and diffusely spread to the cortex, and the excitatory effects last for longer period of time, and rapidly transmitted fibers which which enters into the cortex, and the effect lasts for only short period of time. Now there are certain afferent signals that can reach the ascending reticular system or reticular activating system. Let us see what are the collaterals or the afferent signals that reaches the ascending reticular activating system. 1. The collaterals from the great ascending sensory pathway, that is your long ascending sensory pathways, especially pain signals. Then other pathways, that is your trigeminal auditory, visual and olfactory pathways. And what basically these fibers do is they increases the excitability in reticular excitatory area. Okay, so as they pass through the brainstem and enters into the cortex, it gives a collateral to the reticular activating system, and so it is quite explanatory that whenever you feel a particular sensation, for example something like very painful, you get aroused because there is a collateral passing on to the bulbofacilitatory area or reticular activating system, and that is why you are awake and alert as long as the stimuli persist. So that is collaterals coming from the periphery. Now collaterals also come, or you can say signals also come from the cerebrum as such to the facilitatory area of reticular formation. So those are called as retrograde stimuli. So it mainly comes from almost all parts of cerebrum: somatic sensory cortex, motor cortex, frontal cortex, basal ganglia, hippocampus and other limbic structures and hypothalamus. So somatic sensory cortex, I think I don't have to mention again here. So as whenever for example whenever a pain stimuli you feel, it gives a collateral, and then RAs will get activated. RAs will send signal to the cortex, cortex will again send signal back to RAS. So that is a cycle as long as the effect lasts. Okay. Motor cortex, again it is very simple to understand. Whenever you are performing a movement, you cannot perform any movement in a sleepy state. You need to be active and alert during that performance of that particular movement. Okay, so whenever an activity, motor activity or a thought process gets on, the cortex has to send retrograde stimuli to the RAS, which again sends another signals to the same area of the cortex, and this cycle continues for a while until the activity is ongoing. So that is how the retrograde stimuli can be explained. Now, third group of fibers are from the reticular inhibitory area, that is your medullary reticular formation, mainly in the which is located medially and ventrally. Now, these fibers can actually inhibit the reticular facilitatory area and thereby decrease the activity in the superior portions of the brain as well. And what is the main mechanism? It is mainly due by releasing serotonergic neurons, serotonin releasing serotonergic neurons, which are actually inhibitory. So these fibers can be released, can release serotonin even in diencephalon and cerebrum, and that is how the subject goes into sleep. So serotonin role will be explained again in the when sleep will be discussed. So now we know that there are three collaterals which we can understand. One is the collaterals coming from the ascending fibers, 2 is the retrograde stimuli coming from the cerebrum itself, and 3 is the reticular inhibitory area. Fibers coming from the reticular inhibitory area suppressing the reticular facilitatory area. So just take a while to look at this picture before we go into the next slide. So here you can see the different peripheral signals which comes from the different areas of the periphery, and it it gives a collateral to the reticular formation also. Look here, it is more clear diagram. The collaterals are given, and from there the signals going diffusely into all the areas of the cortex. Now, I said about retrograde stimuli. So those retrograde stimuli, a little bit more detail of retrograde stimuli. They are nothing but they are feedback signals which come from the cerebral cortex. Okay. So these signals which comes from the cerebral cortex back to bulboreticular excitatory area of reticular formation. So it is a reverberating kind of cycle which happens from the excitatory area of reticular formation to cerebral cortex and back to reticular formation again. So this happens whenever the brain is in a thought process or motor process and signals are sent in a to and fro direction, and this is to keep the subject excited or to keep on with the excitatory signals to the cortex as long as the effect need to be lasted. So this kind of excitation of cerebral cortex or even enhancement of the effect is by positive feedback mechanism. So this kind of the cycle of feedback signals is mainly it is called as positive feedback mechanism also. So you would have come across this term in several areas in physiology, positive feedback mechanism, starting from your homeostasis to so many topics. Alright, so it is a positive feedback mechanism which goes on as long as the effect need to be lasted. Okay, so what is the importance of this mechanism? This allows any beginning activity in the cerebral cortex to support still more activity, leading to an awake state of mind. So you can see here the to and fro loop which from the cortex to the cerebrum, to the reticular formation and back to the cortex. Now, regarding the pathway, just to understand the function of the pathway at various levels. So, reticular formation of midbrain and upper pons, now we know the facilitatory area of the reticular formation is mainly leads to intrinsic activation of brain, and reticular formation of brain stem below the mid level of pons, that is mainly your medullary inhibitory area and lower pons to some extent, they causes sleep. So, if there is a lesion in the major pathways of reticular activating system, it can impair consciousness. Severe damage can even cause coma and persistent vegetative state. Now, this can be proved by experimental evidence, that is, after sectioning at the upper end of midbrain, the subject goes into coma, and section at the mid-pontine level, subject goes into indefinite activation. So, I feel it is self-explanatory from what we have already explained in the last few slides. Okay. Now, function of the thalamic portion of RAS. What is the role of thalamic portion of RAS? Now, we know that every area of cerebral cortex connects with its own highly specific area in the thalamus. So, it is a to and fro connection which happens between thalamus and the cortex. Okay, you know that. Now, this electrical activation of the specific area of thalamus activates specific areas of cerebral cortex. That is it. So, signals regularly reverberate back and forth between thalamus and cerebral cortex, both exciting each other. So, that is about the importance of thalamic portion of the RAS. Hence, now we know the function of RAs is mainly wakefulness and alertness. Wakefulness you can explain by or it can be defined as activity in the brain directed into appropriate channels to give the person a sense of conscious awareness. So, it is an activity in the brain directed into appropriate channels to give the person a sense of conscious awareness. RAs causes wakefulness by sending strong facilitatory drive to the central neuron, increasing the responsive to specific stimuli. Okay, fine. Now, regarding certain substances that act on RAS, sympathomimetic drugs like adrenaline, noradrenaline, amphetamine produces alertness and arousal. Acetylcholine increases cortical activity, it is excitatory. Hypercapnia and hypertension also increases excitability of RAS. General anesthetics, sedatives diminishes RAS, and tumors of ascending reticular activating system can lead to prolonged sleep. So, that is all about the ascending and descending projections of the reticular formation. The importance of both these groups of fibers we have discussed here. And now the third part of reticular formation is function of reticular formation, which we will learn in the third part of reticular formation. Thank you.